My husband threw me and our newborn onto the street, thinking I was a burden with nothing to my name. He had no idea my father is the billionaire who just signed the papers to buy his entire company. By sunset, he'll be jobless, homeless, and begging for my mercy. The August sun in Greenwich, Connecticut didn't shine. It glared, turning the pristine cobblestone driveway into a griddle. The heat waves rising from it made the manicured hydrangeas in the background shimmer like a mirage. It was against this backdrop of obscene normalcy that Leo, my husband of 3 years, performed his final, calculated act. He didn't shout. He didn't even look angry. With the efficient disdain of someone discarding a delivery box, he tossed my hastily packed hospital bag. It landed with a sickening, definitive thud next to the infant carrier, where our 3-day-old daughter, Alara, slept fitfully, her face a tiny blossom of oblivious peace. The sound didn't wake her. "You're a distraction I can't afford this week," he hissed, his voice low and venomously precise. His face was a mask of cold calculus, not rage. "My promotion to CEO of Kestrel Dynamics is being voted on tomorrow by the board. I need focus, not midnight feedings, and you're—" He paused, searching for the clinically dismissive phrase, hormonal melodrama. As I clutched the carrier's handle, my knuckles white, pulling Alara closer to shield her from both the searing heat and the chilling vacuum of his words. He didn't look at her, not a glance. His eyes dropped instead to the stock ticker scrolling across the crystal face of his Audemars Piguet smartwatch. A faint, proprietary smirk touched his lips as he noted the pre-market uptick in KSTRL shares. In that moment, the chasm between our realities was laid bare. He saw a liability, a variable threatening to destabilize the perfect algorithm of his ascent. I saw the man for whom I had meticulously hidden the formidable architecture of my true life, sanding down my edges, dampening my light, all for the desperate, hollow prize of feeling normal, of being loved for a curated fiction, of simplicity. He turned, the movement smooth and final, toward the liquid silver Porsche Taycan, idling with a silent, arrogant efficiency. This was the man who debated the ethical implications of AI over Pinot Noir, who could charm a room with a quote from Marcus Aurelius, now leaving his postpartum wife and newborn daughter on a literal curb. A seismic shift happened within me, silent and absolute. The fear, the pleading, the shattered love. It didn't vaporize. It was instantly compressed into a diamond core of resolve. I didn't cry. My tears, I realized, had been part of the costume. With one trembling but now deliberate hand, I reached into the diaper bag slung over my shoulder. My fingers moved past the soft bulks of pacifiers and burp cloths, finding the familiar, cool edge. I pulled out the device, an encrypted, matte black smartphone, its surface devoid of logos or ornament. Without breaking my gaze from Leo's retreating back, I pressed my thumb against the subtle biometric sensor flush with its side. The screen awoke, not with icons, but with a single line of austere, green text flashing once against the darkness. Protocol 0, active, location locked. Leo slid into the Taycan's cocoon of leather and carbon fiber. The door shut with a soundproofed thunk. He began to reverse, a look of impatient relief already settling on his features as he prepared to merge back into his world of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. He never made it off the property. As his car eased backward, the serene, leafy cul-de-sac ceased to be a suburban street and transformed into a tactical arena. From both ends of the lane, where moments before there had been only dappled sunlight, 4 vehicles materialized with silent, predatory grace. They were matte black, armored 2026 GMC Yukon Denali, their windows so deeply tinted they seemed to absorb the light. Discreet federal-style plates were mounted front and rear. They moved without sirens, without haste, a perfectly synchronized maneuver that placed 2 vehicles behind the Porsche and 2 in front, boxing it into a sudden, immovable prison of polished black steel and impenetrable glass. Leo's Tychon stopped, trapped in the center of this sudden constellation of dark metal. I saw his silhouette through the rear window, his head turning left, then right, the confusion visible even in his profile. That confusion had just a second to bloom into dawning panic. Before the passenger side door of the lead Yukon opened, a figure emerged, tall, dressed in tactical casual wear, and moved with a calm, unhurried purpose toward the driver's side of the Porsche. Leo, instinctively hitting the door locks, was met with a faint, digital chirp as the Yukon's occupant presented a slim device to the window. The Porsche's central locking system capitulated with a quiet sigh. The door was wrenched open, and a firm hand reached in. Before Leo could form a protest, before he could invoke his title or his connections, he was extracted from his throne of polished metal and pulled into the shaded confines of the waiting armored vehicle. The door sealed shut behind him, with a sound that was not loud, but which carried a profound, echoing finality across the suddenly silent driveway. The curb where he'd left us was now just a curb. The prison was his. For a moment, there was only the hum of idling engines and the distant, carefree song of a robin in a maple tree. The world had been upended, yet the Connecticut summer afternoon insisted on its placid routine. Then, the passenger door of the lead Yukon opened. The man who emerged was not a bodyguard, not a federal agent. It was my father, Silas Thorne. The transformation was absolute, a reveal that rewrote reality itself. The faded, grease-stained janitor's coveralls he'd worn during his monthly visits to our modest, mortgage-strangled home were gone. The persona of the humble, retired HVAC technician, a man Leo had politely tolerated and privately pitied, had been a masterpiece of theater. In its place stood the man I had known my entire life, yet had meticulously hidden from Leo. He was clad in a suit of midnight blue Brioni wool, so impeccably tailored it seemed less like clothing and more like a second skin of authority, its value dwarfing the Porsche it now overlooked. His silver hair, usually tucked under a baseball cap, was precisely cut, but it was the aura he carried that truly silenced the scene, a quiet, gravitational force of absolute authority. The 6 armed personnel from the other vehicles, formidable as they were, immediately seemed like mere accessories, props in the theater of his will. He didn't glance at the Yukon holding Leo. His focus was singular. He walked toward me with a steady, purposeful stride that consumed the distance of the driveway. His eyes, which had held the sharp, assessing glint of boardroom steel moments before, underwent a profound transformation as they found mine, then dropped to the carrier. By the time he reached us, that steel had melted into a wellspring of grandfatherly warmth, tinged with profound relief. He didn't speak to me first. Instead, he leaned down and placed a gentle, reverent kiss on Alara's sleeping forehead. "Hello, little sovereign," he murmured, a phrase he'd once used for me. The world of hostile takeovers and armored vehicles paused for that sacred second. Then, his professional mantle settled back, not as a replacement for his love, but as its fierce protector. From an aide who materialized at his shoulder, he accepted a device, a slender, obsidian neural link tablet, its surface seamless. He didn't look at its screen. Instead, he made a series of fluid, intricate gestures in the air before him, his fingers pulling and shaping invisible data streams, visible only through his retinal interface. His voice, when he spoke, was calm, resonant, and carried the weight of unimpeachable command. It was the voice that had directed boardrooms, negotiated treaties, and built empires. "Initiate Project Peregrine," he said, the words crisp in the quiet air. "Authorize the pre-drafted tender offer for all outstanding and restricted shares of Kestrel Dynamics. Circuit breaker overrides are pre-cleared. Public disclosure, immediate and simultaneous on all major feeds. Leverage the holdings through the Zurich and Singapore trust architectures. Each command was a stone dropped into a still financial pond, the ripples destined to become tidal waves. On the tablet screen, held by the aide, complex legal and financial schematics flashed, culminating in a single, staggering document. A $15.7 billion all-cash hostile takeover offer for the company Leo had spent his life coveting. Silas gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod. A digital stamp, the sigil of the Thorn Capital Group, flashed crimson across the document, rendering it executed, irrevocable, and public. The vote for CEO tomorrow was now a tragic farce. The company itself was no longer the prize. It was the asset being seized. Only then, with the fate of a multinational corporation settled in less than 60 seconds, did Silas Thorne turn his attention to the source of the day's offense. Leo had been released from the Yukon and now stood, disheveled and ashen, by the door of his impotent Taycan. The smirk, the stock ticker glance, the cold calculation, all were erased, replaced by the hollow stare of a man watching the fundamental axioms of his universe disintegrate. Silas approached him, not with rage, but with the detached, pedagogical tone of a master correcting a foundational error. "You thought you were discarding a burden, Leo," he stated, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed cul-de-sac. "You were operating on a critical miscalculation. You saw a woman you believed had simplified herself for your comfort. You saw a child as a drain on focus. You failed to perceive the ecosystem in which you were merely a favored, but ultimately expendable, organism." He paused, letting the imagery take root in Leo's shattered mind. "You weren't discarding a wife. You were discarding the foundation, the silent, uncredited capital, social and strategic, of every professional success you've ever had. The introductions, the whispered advice on deals, the crises that mysteriously dissolved. That was never your genius. It was your proximity to my legacy." Silas took one last step, closing the distance to a mere foot, his gaze holding Leo's utterly broken one. "So understand the consequence. You didn't just lose a family today. You lost the entire world you spent a decade pretending to build. It was never yours. It was always hers. And now," he finished, with a glance back at me and Alara, "we are taking it back." 1 hour and 17 minutes after being extracted from his driveway, Leo Brennan stood before the gleaming 60-story glass tower of Kestrel Dynamics in Manhattan's financial district. The Porsche Taycan was gone, impounded by the Thorne security detail. He'd arrived by taxi, a surreal indignity that set the tone for the horror to come. The August sun now reflected off the monolith he'd dedicated his life to conquering, but the light felt accusatory, not aspirational. He was here for an emergency board meeting, a meeting he hadn't called, but for which a cascade of panicked texts from suddenly distant colleagues had summoned him. His mind, still reeling from the driveway confrontation, clung to this as an anchor. The board, his allies, they would see this as an outrageous power play, a personal matter. They would circle the wagons. He was still Leo Brennan, the heir apparent. He approached the main bank of bronze turnstiles, the pulse of the building's private security AI humming just beneath the marble veneer. He reached for his wallet, for the matte black keycard with the embossed Kestrel Falcon logo. Executive level, unrestricted access. He swiped it. A red light blinked. A denial chirp, flat and final, echoed in the vaulted lobby. Frowning, he swiped again. Slower. Red. He tapped the card against the reader. Red. He looked up at the facial recognition camera above the turnstile, forcing a composed, authoritative expression. A small, polished speaker emitted a calm, synthetic female voice. Identity: Leo Brennan. Access revoked. Please contact Human Resources for off-boarding procedures. The words were so polite, so sterile, They seemed to suck the air from his lungs. "This is a systems error," he barked at the empty security desk, his voice bouncing off the marble. "I am the CEO of this company." The AI did not respond. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers slipping on the screen. He called his executive assistant, Margot. Through the glass wall separating the lobby from the internal elevators, he saw her. She was walking briskly, head down, clutching a box of personal items. A uniformed security officer he didn't recognize flanked her. "Margot!" he yelled, pounding the glass. Her head jerked up. For a fractured second, their eyes met. He saw not loyalty, but a terrified, pitying urgency. She gave a minute, desperate shake of her head and mouthed a single, silent word. "Don't." Then she was gone, escorted toward the service elevators. A cold, primal understanding began to seep through the cracks of his panic. This was not an error. This was a systematic purge. Abandoning the main lobby, he ducked into a side corridor, memory guiding him to a heavy fire door leading to the back stairwell, the route used by interns and cleaning staff. The door, usually unlocked, was sealed. His keycard failed again. He slammed his shoulder against it once, a futile burst of animal frustration. Then, thinking like the strategist he believed himself to be, he retreated outside and circled the block to a loading dock. Slipping past a confused delivery man, he took a freight elevator, riding it up to the mechanical floor, then sprinted up 2 final flights of concrete stairs to the executive floor's emergency exit. He burst through the door, expecting to stride into his kingdom and take command of the crisis. The scene that greeted him was not one of rallied defiance, but of a silent, efficient autopsy. The usual quiet hum of concentrated power was gone, replaced by a frantic, keyboard-punishing tension. Every employee, from junior analysts to senior VPs, was rigid at their desk, faces illuminated by the hellish glow of multiple monitors. And, on every screen, on the 85-inch Bloomberg terminal walls, on the discrete tablets, on the personal phones clutched in trembling hands, the same urgent news alert screamed in unison, a digital chorus of doom. Breaking. Kestrel Dynamics, KSTRL, enters regulatory trading halt. Unnamed entity acquires 100% equity in pre-market blitz. CEO status unknown. Board dissolved. The words, "CEO status unknown," flickered. A cruel joke. He was standing right there, and he was a ghost. His personal phone, which had been buzzing incessantly, suddenly lit up with a different kind of alert. Not a call or message, but a system notification. Biometric profile invalidated. He tried to unlock it with his thumbprint. Nothing. He punched in his passcode. The screen flashed. "Passcode incorrect. Device will erase after 2 more attempts." He stared, dumbfounded. With a shaking hand, he opened his digital wallet app. It demanded retinal verification. He held the phone to his eye. A red X appeared. Access denied. Credentials revoked by issuing authority. He was locked out of his own life, bite by bite. Frantic, he opened his banking app, the portal to his 7-figure checking account, his 8-figure investment portfolio. The login screen loaded, then immediately redirected to a security failure page, instructing him to call a number with his account details. He had no account details. The system no longer knew him. A final, devastating notification pushed through from an institution he didn't recognize. Thorne Single-Family Office. Secure message. He opened it. It was not a message. It was a statement. Current liquid balance, $0 total asset value. Held, $0. And below, in smaller, precise type, all linked financial instruments, digital assets, and lines of credit have been frozen pursuant to a directive from the sole beneficiary of the Thorne Irrevocable Trust, Silas Thorne, acting as legal guardian for Ilara Thorne Brennan. All pending transactions voided. The phone slipped from his numb fingers, clattering on the polished concrete floor. The sound was deafening in the silent room. Every head turned, not with deference, but with the horrified fascination of watching a monument crumble in real time. He looked from screen to screen, the flashing alerts painting his face in alternating red and white light. The promotion, the stock options, the bonus tied to a CEO title that no longer existed, the offshore reserves, the shell accounts he'd thought so clever, all of it. It was all gone, not stolen, not transferred, frozen, rendered inert, like a fly in amber. He had not been outmaneuvered in a boardroom battle. He had been digitally, surgically, and utterly erased from the global financial grid. He was a null value, a syntax error in the code of his own ambition. The empire he had spent a decade meticulously pretending to build had not been conquered. It had simply stopped recognizing his existence, leaving him standing alone in the blinding, empty glare of screens, announcing his own professional obliteration. The final climb to the penthouse boardroom was a gauntlet run through the corpse of his own ambition. The indifference was a physical force. Assistants he'd commanded for years looked through him as if he were smoke. Junior partners, whom he'd once reduced to tears in this very hallway, now offered not gloating smiles, but something worse, the blank, busy disregard reserved for irrelevance. His name, once a command, had become a nullity. A young security guard, new and too bulky for his suit, stood sentinel at the polished teak doors leading to the inner sanctum. Leo didn't break stride. A raw, destabilized fury, born of utter systemic humiliation, overrode every instinct for strategy. He was pure ed, a cornered animal lashing at the bars of a cage he still couldn't fully see. He shoved past the guard, a clumsy, shoulder-checking move that spoke of desperation, not power. The guard, impeccably trained, didn't fight back. He merely sidestepped, tapped his earpiece, and murmured, "He's entering now," as if announcing the arrival of a mildly inconvenient delivery. Leo burst through the doors, the words of blustering defiance already forming on his lips. They died there, unspoken. The view was, as always, breathtaking. A wall of seamless, triple-paned glass framed the jeweled expanse of lower Manhattan and the Statue of Liberty in the hazy distance. The afternoon sun poured in, gliding the dust motes in the sterile, conditioned air. It was a view designed to make visitors feel small and to make the room's occupants feel like gods surveying their domain. The scene within that rarefied space, however, was personally devastating. Sitting at the head of the 40-foot slab of flawless Carrara marble, his chair and the ergonomic throne he'd selected after 6 months of consultations, was me. I was not slumped, not tentative. I was seated with a posture that spoke of belonging, my spine straight, my hands resting calmly on the cool stone surface. Beside me, within arm's reach, was a sleek, modern bassinet of woven carbon fiber. In it, Alara slept peacefully, a tiny, swaddled jewel oblivious to the tectonic plates shifting around her. I was no longer in the sweatpants and stained tank top he'd last seen me in. I wore a simple, impeccably tailored suit of ivory silk crepe. It was armor, but of a different kind, not meant to intimidate through bulk, but to project an untouchable, pristine authority. It said I did not need to fight in the mud. I presided from a place beyond it. Flanking me were not the familiar, craggy faces of the Kestrel board. They were gone, every last one, already vacated by the new ownership. In their place, arranged in a subtle crescent moon behind me, was a constellation of powers so dense it seemed to warp the light in the room. There were 7 of them. A woman with silver hair cut like a razor, known for dismantling multinationals for breakfast at Skadden. A man with the serene demeanor of a monk, whose hedge fund had quietly triggered 2 sovereign debt crises. The legendary M&A strategist from Hong Kong who never appeared in person, only as a voice on a secure line. here in the flesh. These were not employees or hired guns. They were the council, the innermost circle of the Thorne family's global apparatus. Their names were whispered in the Wall Street Journal, their rare public comments parsed on CNBC like papal edicts. They did not look at Leo with hostility or triumph. They observed him with the detached, analytical curiosity of master physicists watching a failed experiment sputter out. The room was silent, save for the nearly inaudible hum of the climate control and Alara's soft, rhythmic breathing. "Leo," I said. My voice did not echo. It was absorbed and perfectly amplified by the room's acoustically engineered surfaces, reaching him with a calm, invasive clarity. "I'm glad you could join us. I'd like you to meet my father's permanent investment committee. They've managed his strategic interest in your career from the very start." On the massive, frameless LED screen that dominated the far wall, I gestured with a subtle finger swipe on the marble table's embedded control surface. A file appeared, its labels stark and damning in minimalist font. Project Sparrowhawk, Seed to Exit Performance Analysis and Character Audit. It was not a simple document. It was a living ledger, a terrifying tapestry of his life. The interface was sleek, chronological, and endlessly detailed. A timeline began over a decade ago. There, highlighted, was his first startup, Nexus Logistics Software. The record showed its near collapse in month 14, and the miraculous, lucky infusion of $2 million in Series A funding from a boutique VC firm called Airy Ventures. On my command, the screen zoomed, drilled down. Airy Ventures was revealed as a shell, a single-purpose entity. Its sole funding source, the Thorne Strategic Growth Fund, Series 12. The timeline advanced. The pivotal career-making contract with the Department of Defense, the one he'd landed after a chance meeting at a charity golf tournament. The screen displayed the internal email from the Pentagon liaison recommending Kestrel, sourced from a highly placed confidential advocate. A digital thread was traced. The advocate was a retired general, a senior advisor, his consulting firm's largest retainer, paid by the Thorne Geopolitical Advisory Group. On and on it went. A relentless digital autopsy of his luck. The board member who had become his fiercest champion, the one who'd steered him through 2 internal coups. Her private equity firm was a major beneficiary of Thorne co-investments across 3 continents. Every break, every lucky bounce, every door that mysteriously swung open, each was a node on a vast, invisible network, all connecting back to the same radiant core, the Thorne Global Trust. "My father funded your entire trajectory," I explained, my tone clinical, cold, the tone of a pathologist reading an autopsy report to the corpse. "Not as an investment in technology or logistics, not for a financial return. Thorne Capital makes its returns in deeper markets. This was a live-action, longitudinal audit of your character. The seed funding, the contracts, the board support, they were parameters of the test. The control was your innate ambition. The variable was your integrity." I paused, letting the map of his life as a lab experiment glow before him. The final conclusive assay was family, the introduction of an uncontrollable variable, a perceived liability, a demand for selflessness. I met his eyes across the vast table. "You failed, spectacularly. You didn't just lack integrity, Leo. You revealed a profound, systemic weakness in your operational calculus. You mistook patronage for genius, and you discarded the one variable that was, in fact, the master key to the entire experiment." His eyes, wide and bloodshot, darted from the horrifying, beautiful proof on the screen, to the council of silent judges, to my impassive face, and finally, helplessly, to the bassinet. The connection clicked with an almost audible, psychic snap. The air, the trust, the ownership, the horrifying, elegant totality of the trap closed around him. The liability you threw away on the curb, I concluded, my voice dropping to a near whisper that somehow carried even further, is now, by the irrevocable terms of my family's trust, the sole beneficiary. Ilara Thorne Brennan. Every share of this company you fought so desperately to lead now rests in a custodial account in her name, administered by me. The promotion you wanted? The title? It's vacant, but it reports to her. It always did. You just didn't know it. I leaned forward slightly, the first movement I'd made. You were never the architect here, Leo. You were a contractor, a talented, driven, but ultimately expendable contractor. Your work, while initially promising, has been deemed terminally defective. I gave a small, final nod. Your services are terminated, effective immediately. Security will see you out. And, Leo, I added, as the guard from the door moved smoothly to his side, don't bother cleaning out your office. According to the severance clause in Project Sparrowhawk, which of course you never signed because you never knew it existed, all physical and intellectual property developed during your tenure reverts to the project sponsor. That includes your desk photos. They're not yours anymore. Nothing here ever was. The same elite security team he had once tried and failed to hire for personal protection 5 years prior entered the room. Their commander, a man whose very stillness screamed special forces, moved with economical grace to Leo's side. He did not touch him yet. Mr. Brennan, the man said, his voice devoid of inflection, you are trespassing on the private property of the Thorne family office. Your access is revoked. Time to go. There was no dramatic struggle, no valiant last stand. The sheer institutional finality of the statement, the proven capability of the men surrounding him, and the abyss of understanding now yawning at his feet rendered Leo inert. He offered no resistance as they guided him, their hands firm but not brutal, from the boardroom. His procession was a funeral march through the ruins of his identity. He was escorted past his former senior staff, who now watched from glass-walled offices, their faces pale masks of shock and survivalist calculation. They did not meet his hollow-eyed stare. The walk to the private executive elevator was endless, the silence deafening. The elevator descended, not to the garage where his car waited, but to the main lobby, a symbolic demotion, a public deposition. He was walked across the vast, marbled expanse, past the now watching receptionists and visiting clients, a spectacle of utter defeat. The grand laser-cut glass doors sensed his approach and slid open with a generous whoosh, only to seal shut behind him with a definitive, airtight sigh. It deposited him back onto the sun-baked curb of Fifth Avenue, not as a captain of industry, but as a billionaire's reject, a system error expelled onto the sidewalk. He stood there, swaying slightly, the heat of the pavement radiating through his handmade leather soles. The roar of midtown traffic, which had always been the soundtrack of his ambition, now felt like a taunting avalanche. Then, a new sound cut through the din, a low, resonant, electric hum that seemed to descend from the sky itself. He looked up, shading his eyes. On the building's rooftop helipad, a craft was powering up. It was not a conventional helicopter, but a sleek, silver Bell Nexus VTOL, its 6 integrated lift fans spinning with a ghostly quietude. It was $1 million whisper, the very symbol of the frictionless, elevated existence he had craved. As it lifted on a cushion of distorted air, he could see clearly through the panoramic forward window. I was there, in a rear seat, having been whisked up in a private penthouse elevator he never knew existed. I held Ilara close, her head against my shoulder. My gaze was not on the skyline, but down, finding him on his lonely curb. My expression held no hatred, no gloating triumph. It showed something far more devastating, a profound, untouchable pity, the kind reserved for a specimen that had conclusively failed its most basic test. The aircraft then pivoted, nose tilting north, and accelerated with serene power toward the Thorne family compound in the Adirondacks. And from there, to our private island to plan a new legacy on our own terms. As the VTOL became a silver speck against the vast blue, something primitive snapped within Leo. A futile, desperate energy surged. He broke into a stumbling, awkward run down Fifth Avenue, weaving past baffled pedestrians, his eyes locked on the disappearing aircraft, as if sheer force of will could reverse gravity, rewrite code, undo the irrevocable. He didn't make it half a block before his body betrayed him, the shock and adrenaline draining away, leaving only a crushing vacuum. It was then that the shadow fell over him, and the city's roar seemed to focus into a single, declarative boom. He looked up, gasping. Above him, covering the entire side of a skyscraper, a massive digital billboard overlooking Times Square refreshed its news feed. A headline roared to life in 10-foot-tall type, beside a picture of me taken moments ago in the boardroom. My white suit brilliant, my gaze direct. It blazed. Silas Thorne anoints daughter, Aria Thorne, as sole successor. Youngest trillionaire in history assumes control of global conglomerate. The breath left his lungs in a final, defeated rush. His legs buckled. Leo sank to his knees on the hot, grimy pavement, the monumental, glowing proof of his obliteration shining down on him like a cruel sun. The roar of the city, the honking cabs, the chatter of tourists, the pulse of a world moving relentlessly forward, drowned out the sound of his world ending. It was the roar of a future, Ilara's and mine, that was now ascending, clean and silent, into a stratosphere he was never, and would never be, worthy of. Its core educational value lies in demystifying the crucial distinction between perceived authority, symbolized by Leo's title, keycard, and stock ticker, and actual, systemic control, which resides in unassailable legal architectures like the Thorne Trust. The story vividly illustrates that positions and digital assets are merely permissions granted by a deeper ownership framework. When the underlying authority revokes those permissions, the superficial trappings of power evaporate instantly. Furthermore, it highlights the vulnerability of a purely digital existence. Leo's biometrics and digital wallets were disabled, and underscores the enduring, decisive power of tangible analog safeguards like physical trust documents and equity ownership. On a strategic level, the plot emphasizes that the most rigorous due diligence must be conducted on character, not just on business plans, as integrity is the ultimate asset that governs all others. Finally, it demonstrates advanced strategic leverage. True power isn't about direct confrontation, but about orchestrating multiple systems, regulatory, financial, reputational, to create inescapable collateral consequences. In essence, this is a masterclass in building and protecting sovereignty, teaching that security derives not from status symbols, but from a profound command of legal structures, the maintenance of physical and financial backstops, and the wisdom to know that character is the most critical variable in any equation for long-term success.